All right, welcome back. So in this section, what we're going to do is actually look at connecting Power BI to Databricks. So this is kind of a cool section. And what you can see in front of you is a list of parameters. Now, you don't have to use parameters when setting up your connections to your data sources, but I like to do that. And what I've got is my server host, my HTTP path, my catalog, and my database. And so the first two are basically pointing to my workspace and then a compute resource within that workspace. And then the second one is the catalog and then, of course, the database. And so a common scenario for me would be that I maybe want to switch between compute resources for some reason or another, which, and for the most part, I probably won't. But if we wanted to use a smaller or larger compute resource, we have that ability. And then another one would be if I want to change from, we'll say, like dev to QA or prod. So what this does is it helps me with code promotion. And so after you push this up to your workspace, which we can hop up here, and we take a look at, we'll take a look at kind of the lineage of this. And you see this little kind of red triangle. And that's because what's happening is, yes, I've pushed up the data with this, which is really small. So the report works, but I cannot refresh. The reason I can't refresh has to do with my actual host. So if I take a look at the settings of this, where do I go? I go to this little settings wheel up here. I go to the manage connections and gateways. And then we'll see kind of, well, three things really. We've got the connections, on-premise data gateways, and then virtual network data gateways. Now I want to try to delete this, the VNet data gateway, but I've already clicked on doing that. So it might still show up for a while. The VNet data gateways are this kind of cool new feature that would allow you to communicate privately with resources that are in your VNet. This was a feature that was recently transitioned from preview to GA. And it looks like this went GA actually in February of 2024. So this is very, very new to GA. When it transitioned over, you cannot use this with premium per user licensing, which is what I use. So premium per user licensing is about $20 per user, which is really good for smaller organizations. When you get to bigger organizations, you have capacity pricing, and capacity pricing, I think the entry point for that is around $5,000 per month, which, you know, I think the break even point ends up being like around 2,500 users. So for smaller organizations, did I say 2,500? 250 users. So for smaller organizations or for myself, for my lab, I just can't spend $5,000 a month to have capacity to then be able to use this VNet data gateway. And so why this is important is if we go back to my parameters here and we take a look at this piece right here, the server host, that aligns with my SQL warehouses. And so if we go to the actual SQL warehouse itself and we take a look at the connection details, I've got my server host name and then the path to the actual resource itself. Well, this server host is part of my URL. This is what I'm blocking public access to. So even from Power BI, I cannot directly access my workspace or the compute resources within it because I specifically blocked that. So you have to be on a site-to-site VPN to connect to my workspace and to connect to these resources, or you at least have to be coming in from like a Bastion host or somewhere within my network. And so that VNet data gateway was one option that we could potentially use. And another option is, if we go back to Power BI, would be an on-premise data gateway. Now, I don't necessarily want my on-prem data gateway to be sitting like truly technically on-prem, but what we can do is a little workaround where we install a Windows server within my VNet, and then we install an on-prem data gateway on that. And so then what we can do is create a connection between Power BI and then that gateway that then allows me to have access to the SQL warehouse. So in order to do that, let's hop over to Terraform, and I'll just go into my hub, and I've got a Windows VM Terraform file here. And so what we're going to do is, first of all, let's think about the specs on this VM, and I'll go ahead and run a Terraform apply, then I'll talk to you about this code. So I'm creating a Windows VM. It requires a NIC. I'm going to give it a random password, and I'm going to push that password up into my vault. So the size of this, I'm using a B2S, which is a little bit smaller than recommended. It's 2 core, 4 gigs, and it costs about $30 a month, which for my lab, that's a little bit more than I'd like to spend, but I'm going to keep this on the cheap end as much as I can. So the VNet Data Gateway, I think, uses 2 cores and 8 gigs of RAM as far as its hardware is concerned. And then I think the recommendation for an on-prem data gateway is 4 cores and 8 gigs of RAM. And so there's kind of like this weird tier. There's like weird tiers within Azure where I don't think that the 4 core, 8 gigs of RAM VM, I don't think that's available. I think you jump right up to 16 gigs of RAM. So kind of play around with this, see what you really need. For me though, I'm just going to start with something really small. The username is Andrew. I'm just going to use a random password for this. This is all kind of real basic stuff. I'll go ahead and say yes. And this one, I'm using a 2022 data center for it. We're in 2024, so I think 2022 is even a bit dated now. You might not want to go back any earlier than that, or you'll probably have to install some additional .NET software just to get it to get your operating system more current. What else? The network part. So for the network, I am putting this in my private subnet in my VNet. So I have a network subnet over here that I've created. So this is kind of earlier on in the tutorials I showed you how to do this, but the main thing is you just need a subnet that can communicate or where your VM can communicate with your Databricks resources. So yeah, this is setting up my my random password also. The random password is then going to be injected into my key vault as a secret. So in order to know where my key vault is, I'm bringing in an Azure Key Vault data block. I'm just grabbing it by name and by resource group. And then the output of that password, that literally is just going into that's just going in as a secret. So I'm grabbing the actual password itself for that Windows VM, and then I'm grabbing the result out, and then using the ID that I just extracted from my key vault itself, and I'm passing that same password up here as well. So it looks like this created successfully. So what we'll do is actually hop on over to my Windows VMs, and we will refresh because I basically built this and tore it down. And I'll show you something about this this secret as well here in just a minute. So what we're going to do is remote into this. There is no public IP. There's a private IP. So because I'm on site-to-site VPN, I can connect to this. Let's go on ahead and refresh this. So we should see a new version pop up. So if you've built and destroyed your keys like I do, you not only refreshing the page, but actually refreshing this section as well to grab the latest secret. So again, I'm not really too worried about this secret getting out, which I don't think you'll see it, but I'm not too worried about it because this is sitting behind my private network, and I build this stuff up and destroy it, and build it up and destroy it so often that whatever you see is not really a big deal. And so let's go on ahead and RDP into this. It's going to be 10.0.1.4. So 10.0.1.4. Let's just get rid of that part. We'll connect, give it a password. We'll say okay. Yeah, I trust it. That's fine. All right. So this is going to take just a second to log into. So while that's getting ready, we've got the secret, we've got the VM. We're going to come over here, and what we're going to do is we're going to install an on-prem data gateway that will then connect to this, and then we'll have to work with some tokens next. So while this is spinning up, let's see. Let's go on ahead and hop into our browser. I'll give it just a second. I'll pause real quick. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is say, yes, I will let this be discoverable by other devices on my network. That's kind of the whole point of this, is that it works with other devices on my network. I don't care about that admin center. We might use that later, but not for this. And we're going to go ahead and hop into Edge. So you might be able to download this file later, but I'm going to start this without giving them any of my data. Confirm and continue. You don't need my data. I don't care about making my experience more useful. Let's confirm and start browsing. And we're going to go to Power BI on-prem gateway. And we're just going to go to the download section. It looks like this froze. Okay. We're going to go to the download section and we're going to go to the Microsoft on-prem data gateway. Let's do the standard mode. We'll download this. Should not take too long. It's a fairly small app. So 3, 2, 1. Let's give it just another second.
Playing from Galaxy S23 Ultra.
Thanks. Alexa is letting me know that my phone is dying. Okay. Let's open this file. Minimize this. Might take just a second. All I'm trying to do is just open up this downloaded gateway installer. I'm going to go ahead and accept the terms and install. You probably saw it. It went by pretty quickly, but it said something about make sure that you've got the minimum requirements for this. Otherwise, you'll have a performance bottleneck. I already kind of talked to you about that. We're expecting a performance bottleneck on this size of a VM, but we're also not going to be using that much data, so this is just for my lab. This section, though, this does take about 3 or 4 minutes to install. Not too bad for the working out on it in the real world, but I'm not going to make you sit here and watch it, so I will pause the video and I'll be right back. All right, I'm going to go ahead and resume. This is almost done. One thing that I do want to point out is if I minimize this and I show you my tenant, so if I go to this question mark up here and I show you about Power BI. So this is kind of my default setting. Power BI was stood up for me in Central US. Like I don't think I put it there myself. And the rest of my lab, the rest of my cloud environment is actually sitting in East US. So with this lab, I don't really care too much about that because I'm only going to be pushing up a very small amount of data. But if you're doing this professionally, you will want to make sure that those are in the same tenant or the same, that your tenants are in the same location. Otherwise, you will get hit with egress charges. If you're in the same region, I don't think there's any egress charges, but being in separate tenants, you will get hit with that. So it's just something to be mindful of. That said, it's kind of a nasty process of reaching out with the global administrator's permissions, reaching out to, Power BI, making a service request, all that. So read up on that. It's not fun. It takes a few days, bare minimum. That's assuming you don't have a lot of data in there, but it's definitely worth the effort to save you potentially thousands of dollars of egress charges. So that said, we're going to take a look at just installing the rest of this on-prem data gateway. So I'm just going to put my password in here, or my email address in here. And we are going to have a couple of errors popping up just because of permissions, and then well, I didn't do that right. We're going to have a couple of permissions errors here in a second, and then we'll just power through them and then get going. All right, so yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just add this. So add it, close, add it, that's fine, close. All right, we can't sign you in. So all I had to do is just add those two pieces. So we should be able to sign in now. So just pushing my email again. So Andrew at the dataplatform.io. Okay, hit up the authenticator. Okay, register your new gateway on this computer. Yep. Okay, we'll call this my Windows VM data. I'll just call it gateway. Yeah, data gateway. All right, we'll configure this. I think we can add to an existing cluster if we already had one, but this will be the only cluster that we have. So this should just take a second. And so that part's connected. We should be able to go ahead and close this. Close out. Yeah, I'm fine closing that remote session. So we should be able to refresh this, and it might just take a minute to refresh. And here we go. So now I've got a VM data gateway. All right, so now that we've got this gateway, what do we do? Let's head back over to my workspaces. If you recall, I have a failure to connect, and that's because it's not connected to anything. So if we go into the settings of this, what we can do is go into my gateways and cloud connections. We'll turn this on. We will select this gateway here. It says it's not configured correctly. That's fine. We'll give this thing just a second. Okay, so what I can do now is just manually add this to my gateway. I'm fine with that. We'll call this Andrew's personal access token. And then what we'll do is come over here, and if you remember, I showed you, well, looks like I'm getting kicked out here. I showed you a few pieces of information. I showed you my server host name, my HTTP path, and the other thing that I don't think I showed you before, but I've also got a personal access token. So let's just grab these three things. And I know a lot of people are probably thinking, why the heck is he showing his personal access token? I'm going to delete it here in a minute anyways. So that's the first part. The second part is this path. Grab that. This is the path of my actual compute resource. And then the authentication method. We're going to use a username and password where the username is simply token. And then this is my Databricks personal access token. All right. And we're not going to stick with my personal. We're going to hop back to the service principles here shortly anyways. But this is just to get the ball rolling. So we're going to keep this at organizational for right now. We'll go ahead and say create. And so up here, there's three different things. You got the on-prem, and we got the virtual network, and then the cloud. I think by default, what it's going to use is that cloud one. But what we're doing is we're switching it over to the virtual network one. So let's see, we've got our gateway. Now what we need to do is map it to my personal access token. Hit apply. Looks like there's a little check here. The demo gateway connection has been updated, so that's good. And what do we have? We've also got some parameters here. So we'll circle back to this, and we've also got the data source credentials. So it's basically going through the credentials of my connection. So let's just kind of come back here real quick, and we'll do a refresh on this. And you can now see on the left-hand side also, the gateway is to my Windows VM virtual gateway, or my data gateway. So this is spinning, and what we should see is, well, let's take one more look at this real quick. So I've got my personal access tokens in there. What seems to be the issue? So my cloud data gateway, so that part looks good to me. The parameters, let's check on that. That part looks good. So what is the issue? Go to my workspace. So we should have the right gateway. Let's check this real quick. So that is successful. View the item details. take a look at this report. So far, this part looks good to me. Well, let's go back to the workspace. My workspace. Let's see what the details are on this. Cross-reference finish when operation initialized state. So the initialized state, that might just be a timing issue. Let's refresh it again. Okay, so I think I just got a little bit, I think I was just moving a little bit too fast. So now that that's updated, that says that I've got an updated data set. We can open my report, and I'll show you that the data right now is dev data. And so this is the cool part where we hop over here to the workspace, and however you want to get to it, but you can go to the workspace as long as you get to the semantic model and you go to the settings. And then we come over here to the parameters, and if you recall, we were looking at dev. And if we switch this over to QA, we can apply this. Give it just a second. And now I can go back to my semantic model, and I can't remember if I can do it here or not. So let's open up the lineage of it. And so let's refresh it one more time. And so what it's doing now is it should be refreshing. Okay, there's a refresh in progress, so I gotta slow my roll. So with it refreshing right now, what that means is it's actually updating the parameters, and the parameters are the connections. So if we refresh the actual data, you can now see that the data has gone back in, and so it's gone back through and it's queried my data warehouse, this time with a new connection string. So it's kind of a lot to cover here, but there's some stuff that's messy, right? So the things that are messy that we'd want to really think about in the future would be personal access tokens. So if I go to my workspace and we go to actually the connection itself, so let's go to the settings of this. Come back over here one more time, and we go to the actual connections and gateways. I'm happy with this gateway, but it's the connection itself that I'm not happy with. So what we did was we had this initial connection here, and we created this new connection. And when we created this new connection, what we did was, if we go to the settings, we created this using my personal access token. So just as kind of like icky as that felt, probably for you watching it, it also it's just not good practice to use my own. And like I promised before, so if I go into my my user settings, and then I go to my developer settings, and I go to access tokens, I'm just going to go ahead and just delete my token. Like, so there's no security issue there now. And so now that there's no token, let's go ahead and try to refresh this data set one more time. So let's go back to it. Let's refresh. And it should fail. So it failed because there's no token anymore. And so what we're going to want to do more long term is move away from using my personal tokens to the token associated with the service principal. So we're going to cover that in a future video, but I think this covers just about everything for right now. So yeah, have fun. See ya.